everyone, and welcome to this event. I'm Ben Williams. I'm an assistant professor of Hinduism and Yoga Studies here at Naropa, and also the chair of the MA in Yoga Studies program. And I'm just delighted to be with you all tonight, and also to introduce Carole Clements, our teacher for tonight's exploration of erotic justice and sexual citizenship. Carole is an associate professor of contemplative psychology here at Naropa. Their academic and professional beginnings were actually in political science. Carole originally worked as a legislative aide for the New York State Assembly. And after this foray into politics, they arrived at Naropa in the 90s, which was a really dynamic decade in Naropa's history as a student. And then Carole completed here at Naropa an MA in contemplative psychology, followed by an MFA in writing and poetics. Carole is currently completing a PhD, I think she's in her final stages, in sex therapy and sex education at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. Carole's teaching and scholarship seamlessly weave critical sexual studies with contemplative therapy. And in their research and teaching, both of these disciplines are animated by Carole's background in literature. Carole's intellectual life, in my experience, is imbued with a profound aesthetic sensibility, not to mention formidable literary powers. Carole recently shared with me that one of their lifelong love affairs is with the art of writing. And on that note, I'm excited to share about their forthcoming book, slated to release this fall with Routledge Press. It is entitled Sex Positivity and White Sex Supremacy, Ending Complicity in Black Body Erasure. Carole's monograph is a part of a series on leading conversations in Black sexualities and identities. And the editor of this series described it as a work of art, which in the realm of peer-reviewed publications is a very rare thing for someone to say about a book. In personally encounters with Carole, I've appreciated the way in which Carole enlivens any topic of conversation with a profusion of energy, compassionate insight, and a kind of divergent wisdom. Carole is adept at seeing against the grain, and able to vividly capture and do justice to that vision in language. In one dialogue with Carole actually introduced me to a concept she uses. It's called splace time. And Carole explained that splace time is a way of describing queer temporalities or queer ways of experiencing time. I love this word. And the neologism splace, which is a combination of place and space, leapt out as a powerful way of describing the way in which the spaces in which we move can be saturated with histories and human life worlds. And Naropa is one such splace. In addition to its storied history going back to 1974, we're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary. Naropa is also sitting on lands with a much deeper history, including the communal lives of the Red Willow Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute. There's also traces on these lands of memories embodied in Apache pottery, and these lands were frequented by Navajo traders, Comanche warriors, and Shoshone wanderers, a history that is important to acknowledge. So with no further ado, I want to welcome Carole. I first want to just say that her talk will be followed by a question and answer session. So during her talk, if questions or comments or inspirations arise, I want to encourage you all to capture them, and also feel free to enter them in the Q&A tab. So please join me in welcoming Carole Clements. Carole, I believe your sound is off.
Thank you. Thank you. I was saying thank you so much. I am really touched by your heartfelt introduction. It's always a odd experience to hear how you're perceived, I think, and experienced in the world, and it's touching and moving. So thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. I'm looking forward to this talk to see what we might make of it together. Before I begin sharing my screen, I have a lengthy PowerPoint. If any of my students are here, you know what I mean. I actually tried to do better this evening, but it feels important that I introduce quite a bit of terms to ground us in this burgeoning exploration of sexual citizenship and erotic justice, and kind of rolling around what might in our minds and our mouths and our bodies, what might this actually mean to us? How might we know it and understand it? So with that, I'm going to cue up my PowerPoint and we'll begin the formal talk. It is truly a treat to be here with you all. I'm Carole, as Ben said. I identify as queer with a feminine aesthetic. I prefer epicene pronouns, they, them, or my given name, Carole. And for me, they are that. They are preferences, which is not true for all people. I also will respond to any pronouns, they, he, she, but I resonate with the multiplicity of they. And multiplicity we might think of for our talk here is the quality or state of being various, which in my experience aligns with my identity. The story, as my mother tells it, goes like this. When I was born, fresh out of her uterus, the nurse who caught me or helped catch me asked if my mother would like a boy or a girl. And my mother responded, a boy. And the nurse handed me to my mother. And I was raised and socialized female, though I loved G.I. Joes as much as Barbies. And as Ben spoke of, I appreciate aesthetics, particularly colorful aesthetics, and I appreciate direct, no BS. So you should also know that I'm from New York originally. I am culturally Polish Catholic and white. So place time has been acknowledged. Religion, ethnicity, and race are pertinent to erotic justice and sexual citizenship, especially race, which is too often overlooked. My book that will be forthcoming, it may be early 2024 as opposed to the fall 2023. I received an email last night about that. Underscores how white supremacy and the social construct of race shapes all of our sexualities. In addition to being a professor at Naropa, I am a sex and relationship therapist with what I term a decidedly queer agenda, meaning I help people interrogate sexual and relational normativities to create uniquely fulfilling and just intimacies, which hopefully are comprised of authenticity, nuance, complexity, and difference, so we might thrive individually and collectively amid empowerment and love. This is an introductory talk, the first of and foundational to many, I hope, in a virtual public square, or make that circle, as we like to arrange ourselves at Naropa. We have come here to talk about sex. Unfortunately, though, it is something we rarely do, consciously and critically in community, though, whoops, sorry about that. Though it's something we rarely do, though we do it unconsciously and or disconsciously, meaning without thorough and critical examination far too often, accepting normative standards of gender, sex, sexuality, and intimacy, without questioning their racist, ableist, ageist, cis heterosexist underpinnings, as if what we have been told about sex and sexuality is true, or even more damaging, natural. As a result, too many of us become unnatural and quickly because we don't have or can't access our desire, because we feel awkward, embarrassed, ashamed about what we do like or fantasize about sexually, or because sex hurts, to name just a few of our sexual worries. Historically, our sexual issues, quote, move from being characterized as discursively bad or deviant to sick or abnormal and diagnosable. The latter underscores the medical model of sexuality that is prevalent today, which I want to problematize, like the feminist New View campaign did in the 1990s. Sex went awry when religion, science, culture, and politics co-opted it, which is perhaps inevitable. Still, I believe it is our individual and collective responsibility to take it back. This talk is an attempt to do that. This is a photograph of the campus where I began having critical conversations about eroticism and sexuality with Naropa students, consciously, in 2013. Although my colleague Jason Apt, co-teacher and co-conspirator for many, many years, pointed out that I was always talking about sex and its intersections, I was just less aware that I was doing it. Together, students and I have talked about sex in earnest here at 2130 Arapahoe Avenue in Boulder, Colorado. Outside on the west lawn on a picnic blanket, I spread with an array of aphrodisiacs to stimulate our senses more than our sexual desire, though I suppose that was there too. It's taboo even at Naropa to talk about sex. On the back lawn beyond the sycamore trees where we observed 2 praying mantises having sex, and inside the Lincoln building featured here, in classrooms on all levels, literally and figuratively, on the top floor, the main floor, and the basement, where I taught erotic intelligence. Sexually, we always need to know what's lurking in our metaphorical basements, what stays underground, disavowed, hidden, and why. Because it feels too embarrassing, shameful, revealing, because we may risk losing those we love. Because our propensity to hide sexually or be hidden, I am thrilled that our classroom space for engaging the topics of erotic justice and sexual citizenship has expanded this evening to include all of you. So welcome to Musings on Erotic Justice and Sexual Citizenship. I use the word musing deliberately as a nod to the creative process and the muse, a force of inspiration for a work of art that is often personified like Eros, which we will get to, which is what I believe we are also engaging in here. Art, defined as something created with imagination and skill that expresses important ideas and/or feelings. To muse also invites reflection, a key feature of contemplative education at Naropa, where we reflect to understand deeply and more fully, making our time here together precious but insufficient to fully grok what erotic justice and sexual citizenship may mean for serving our activism and effectuating beneficial change in the world. These are concepts I've had a great deal of time to reflect upon, and they remain elusive even to me. Ungraspable, like a hard candy you roll around in your mouth, savoring its sweet or sour flavor, watermelon, orange, lemon, lime. Ooh, so good, you've got it. Until it gets away from you, just like that. Pops out of your mouth before your tongue can catch it, drops onto the floor and rolls, gathering dust, lint, and microscopic debris. Ah, but now we've got something interesting, something more to chew on. Not just literally, but figuratively. Something we must relate to differently because it's no longer as it was. In a moment, it changed, encountered otherness, dust and dirt, which seemingly does not belong to it. You might see where I'm going. In doing so, it changed and changed us. Maybe now we're annoyed that our yummy sweet sour candy is dirty and we have to wipe it off, presenting a dilemma. Do we pop it back into our mouth or not? Yuck, yum? Or maybe we're amused, laughing as we run across the floor to catch it. All of this is my invitation to you, to be open to what you encounter here, savoring what you hear, rolling it around, not to accept or endorse what I am saying, but to relate to it fully by engaging your senses before you decide anything definitively, before you know. And when it pops out and becomes ungraspable, as it likely will, no problem. Simply notice what you notice, as poet Allen Ginsberg, co-founder of the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at Naropa, was fond of saying, and return to the moment with openness and curiosity. I am inviting the dynamic process of contemplative education to occur for us here through the process of the three prajnas, which I introduce in my courses. As an indigenous epistemology, meaning how we come to know, the three prajnas help us discern knowledge from insight, toward cultivating wisdom. Prajna is Sanskrit for penetrating insight. Together, the three prajnas invite a process for deepening our understanding, valuing knowledge, what we might consider to be the facts, while inching us toward wisdom, a more robust, all-encompassing relatedness and generative way of knowing. I liken the cultivation of wisdom to the discovery of pop rocks, which happened accidentally, as if within a methodical process when William Mitchell, a food chemist, was trying to design an instant soft drink. He put some flavoring mixed with carbon dioxide into his mouth and pow, pop rocks were born. He valued scientific methods and trusted his intuition, akin to what I am suggesting we do here. Let us now, maybe just a bit more formally, begin. As a practice of contemplative education, the three prajnas in Tibetan Buddhism are referred to as hearing, contemplating, and meditating, or studying, reflecting, and integrating. Like with the hard candy we are rolling around in our mouths, we first taste, then chew, and finally digest. The first prajna, hearing or studying, requires that we become curious by opening our minds and engaging our senses to come to know something. In this case, erotic justice and sexual citizenship, initially or thoroughly. With a second prajna, contemplating or reflecting, we invite ourselves in. What does it mean to us personally? How have we lived erotic justice? How has sexual citizenship shaped us? The third prajna, meditating or integrating, combines knowledge with insight, requiring pause. Traditionally, we literally meditate to release our minds from its thinking and sense-making projects. We stop, take a pause, breathe, return refreshed, able perhaps to see something new or something familiar in a new way, like our coated hard candy, having rolled across our unswept floor, now a textured artistic masterpiece, our muse. We pop it into our mouth, surprised, even delighted by its sweet, crunchy burst of granularity, a deliberate, accidental discovery like pop rocks. I invite you to apply the three prajnas to the concepts of erotic justice and sexual citizenship as I present them and you encounter them. Hearing what I say, notice what arises for you, being open to surprise and unanticipated delight. Delight here refers more to vividness than goodness or yumminess, though there may be that too. There is a lot of foundational knowledge for establishing the basis of an introductory talk on erotic justice and sexual citizenship. Hang in there with me. I promise we will get to the heart of the matter. First, however, we need to define key terms and concepts to talk about sex honestly and intelligently, or we will fail to think about sex critically and complexly, which is essential to talking about sex skillfully, and also to disrupting normative ideas about sex and sexuality. Normativity is one of our terms. Many of you may know the terms and concepts in the glossary for this talk. For those of you who do, I appreciate your patience. I also trust that you understand the necessity of introducing key terms and concepts here. To be activist is to be meaningfully disruptive. Whether we are calling out or calling in, we are acknowledging the urgent need for social and political change, in this case with an explicit focus on sex and sexuality, which includes sexual identity, desire, and expression that need not be congruent, and a robust yet always incomplete glossary, which itself shifts as our liberatory efforts bear fruit and our freedom to be is realized. Concept 1, discursive sex. Sex and talk of sex are often regarded as private, as something that should occur and be kept behind closed doors. First, the idea that sex and talk of sex is or should be private is absurd, given that sex abounds in US culture, the location of this talk, in advertising and music, on social media and TV. Second, privatizing sexuality can be a manipulative tactic to shut down open, honest, and critical conversations about sex. In the 1970s, critical theorist Michel Foucault pointed out that rather than being private and repressed, sexual discourse, meaning talk of sex, proliferates in the public sphere. How it proliferates and who controls a narrative matters to establishing erotic justice and sexual citizenship. Here's a hint. US-centric talk of sex elevates a cis, white, heterosexist sexist narrative of sex. Most broadly, discourse can be defined as words creating worlds. More specifically, discourse is a dynamic social practice that constructs the parameters of our social world, shaping our personal identities and social relationships. Sexual discourse is an expressed focus on how gender, sex, and sexuality is discursively shaped through talking about sex. We define sexual discourse as casual and professional talk of sex, oral and written, with authoritative certainty. In the history of sexuality, Foucault writes that there is an institutional incitement to speak about sex, and to do so more and more. Censorship, he argues, is not how power is exercised. Rather, it is the incitement to speak about one's sexuality to experts, such as clergy, educators, therapists, even parents, so that sex can be better regulated. Consider Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, who talks about sex a lot, keeping it in the news by regulating it. One example is House Bill 1552, which opponents have dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. Although the bill does not include the word gay, it prohibits classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity for grades pre-K through 3. Just yesterday, April 19th, 2023, it was expanded to include grades 4 through 12, limiting instruction about gender identity and sexual orientation unless it is expressly required by state academic standards or as part of a reproductive health course or lesson for which students' parents have the option to have their student not attend. Gender identity and sexual orientation are fundamental to this talk and ensuring sexual citizenship and erotic justice. Let's examine next the concept of normal, which is a question I often get as a sex and relationship therapist. Am I normal? Are we normal? Sexually, relationally? To understand what it means to be normal, let's consider a four-leaf clover, an uncommon folkloric symbol of good fortune. A four-leaf clover is not normal, meaning common, but is considered good, whereas uncommon typically means bad, not normal, not okay, not acceptable, especially when it comes to sex and sexuality. Even if we fall within the statistical average of normal, we should consider ourselves sexually unique. Consider vanilla sex, the euphemism for plain old regular sex, the definition I found while preparing for this talk. As a sex therapist, I have no idea what that means. If you're engaging in vanilla sex, I have no idea what it looks like or if it's pleasurable for you or not, unless we sit down and have a lengthy conversation, which you may or may not want to have with me. For the sake of this talk, let's assume that if you like vanilla, it's pleasurable for you, and if you don't, it's not. But even if you like vanilla, I presume that your vanilla and my vanilla do not taste the same. They are likely not made from the same bean or batch. Even if they are, how I experience vanilla is unique to my taste buds, my interpretation, my life experience. The same is true for you. It is that complex. There is no way that we can ever know if our vanillas or our chocolates or strawberries, pistachios, butter brickles, or cookies and cream taste the same. Yet we compare nevertheless, then fret that we don't measure up. Am I sexually normal when compared to so-and-so? Are we sexually normal when compared to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so? Well, I doubt it. Because even though people use the term vanilla sex to refer to mild, boring, routine sex, in culinary circles, vanilla is known to be an incredibly complex flavor, not just one solitary scoop of simple. So what is normal? Regarding sex and sexuality, normal is reductionistic. It introduces false, binary either-or choices, such as male or female, man or woman, straight or gay, good or bad, normal or abnormal. Normal doesn't tell us that vanilla comes from the beans of the flowering orchid Vanilla planifolia, grown in the lush, biodiverse hotspot of Madagascar, known for its rare and unique wildlife, or that vanilla extract is made by macerating, percolating vanilla pods in a solution of ethanol and water. Honestly, all of which sound erotic and sexy to me. This is why reductionistic language like normal or vanilla is problematic when it comes to talk of sex. To understand normal in this context, it's important to distinguish between norm, normal, and normative. Norm is a statistical measurement citing the frequency by which something occurs. Normal is the average or most common frequency. Normative is the process of becoming normal, insinuating how something or someone should be. Our four-leaf clover is unique, lucky, auspicious, but not statistically average or normal. While vanilla may be a statistically popular ice cream flavor, heterosexual, procreative, missionary-style sex is only one kind of vanilla sex. In fact, the term vanilla sex was coined by the kink community to differentiate sexual preferences that do not involve slapping, gripping, spitting, biting, gagging, doming, subbing, consensual power exchange, role-playing, discipline, restraint, humiliation, or pain of any kind. Non-kink practitioners often characterize vanilla sex as more intimate and vulnerable than kinky sex, but that is subjective and a matter of preference rather than fact. Sex, gender, and sexuality are framed normatively using binary language. Conventionally, sex is male or female, gender is man or woman, sexuality is straight or gay. More specifically, sex is a biological marker assigned at birth based on observable primary sex characteristics, such as the vulva, clitoris, penis, scrotum, and a male-female binary classification system. Gender is how a person identifies according to cultural gender roles based on a binary man-woman classification system. Cis or cisgender means on the side of or in agreement with the sex assigned at birth. Agender means not identifying with gender. Trans or transgender means across from or not identifying with the sex assigned at birth. Similarly, non-gender, genderqueer, the terms are endless, means not identifying with the confines of a male-female gender binary. You may experience gender as fluid, multiple, and varied, like I do, rather than fixed. Sexuality also refers to as sexual orientation. Sexuality, also referred to as sexual orientation, is comprised of sexual identity, desire, and behavior that need not be congruent. People with variations in sex characteristics are born with chromosomal, gonadal, and/or anatomical features that do not fit neatly into the restrictive male or female binary. Intersex is evidence of sex difference, not disorder. It is estimated that between 0.05 and 1.7% of infants are born with intersex characteristics, similar, by the way, to the statistics for redheads. Each are rare, like a four-leaf clover. Variation in sex characteristics have always existed. Indigenous cultures have revered intersex people as being closer to spirit. Tragically, however, this does not protect them from oppression, hatred, or violence, or stop them from being sexually discriminated against. Two-spirit is a term Indigenous people use to identify the spectrum of gender and sexual orientation that importantly is best described in Indigenous language. Two-spirit also acknowledges the interrelationship between feminine and masculine, what relationship science refers to as expressive and instrumental qualities within individuals, families, cultures, and the natural world. The Two-Spirit movement is a cultural movement by Native peoples to reclaim and honor two spirits in activist and community celebrations. To distinguish between gender and sexuality or sexual orientation, we might consider gender is who you go to bed as, whereas sexuality or sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Importantly, however, we want to be careful not to oversimplify gender and sexuality, which are complex and extend beyond binary classifications and limitations to fluid, even unpredictable identities, experiences, and expressions. Sexuality, also referred to as sexual orientation, is conventionally understood to mean attraction to a particular gender. This is one way gender and sexuality get conflated when they are distinct. Sexual orientation involves identity, desire, and behavior that need not be congruent. Sexual identity is who internally we feel we are sexually and how we choose to identify outwardly within a sociocultural context. Sexual desire is comprised of our sexual wants, longings, fantasies. Sexual behavior is what we choose to do sexually. Conventionally, sexual attraction is based on a gender binary. Here you see that we can be attracted to the opposite gender, same gender, both the opposite and same gender, all within the male-female, man-woman binary. Expanding beyond the limitations of binary attraction, we can be attracted to more than one gender, regardless of gender, or all genders equally. We can also feel sexually attracted beyond gender altogether, as with demisexual or sexual attraction that is based on emotional connection, or sapiosexual, sexual attraction based on intellectual connection. I review all of this to lay the foundation for an ongoing critical and complex interrogative query, which I spell listen, Q-U-E-E-R-Y, a query of normative sexuality. When I refer to normative sexuality, I'm referring to hegemonic narratives of sexuality. The word hegemony means those of the ruling class, or those in control of our sexual and intimate lives, including how we talk about sex. Notably, the science of sex and the science of relationship are weird, not the good kind, meaning that scientific study of our intimate lives is overwhelmingly white, Western, well-educated, industrial, relatively rich, and democratic. This establishes and prioritizes patriarchal and heteronormative values, the latter a way of life more than a sexual orientation, valuing marriage, family, children, legacy, a 9-to-5 workday, as if that's how it should be. If you remember nothing else from this extensive glossary of relevant terms and concepts, remember this: sexual discourse, or talk of sex, is predicated on a difference in kind, like apples and oranges, rather than degree, like differing states of ripeness among bananas. Because of this, we hear and believe claims like men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Sexual citizenship and erotic justice rest on a different interpretation of gender and sexuality, which is based on a difference of degree rather than kind. A green banana, yellow banana, and brown banana have different levels of sweetness, but they are all bananas. Remembering this may make a significant difference in your sexual and erotic lives and your efforts toward achieving sexual liberation and erotic freedom. Despite binary language that suggests a difference in kind rather than degree, we have more in common than we think with regard to sex. Genetically male and female fetuses have undifferentiated gonads initially. There is no phenotypic differentiation in reproductive structures until the 6th week of gestation, when the SRI gene on the Y chromosome initiates testicular differentiation in genetic males, via a testosterone surge. Without this surge, the fetus develops into a biological female. Homologous sexual and/or reproductive structures include the clitoris is equal to the penis, or a homologous structure to the penis. Labia majora and minora are aligned with the scrotum. Regarding erectile tissue, the labia minora vestibular bulbs are aligned with the corpus spongiosum, or the shaft of the penis. Through anatomical observation, Galen, the father of anatomy, believed there to be one sex, not two. Rather than being divided by sexual or reproductive organs, he hypothesized that the two sexes are linked by a common one. Galen said, "You could not find a single male part left over that had not simply changed its position." Galen argued that a difference in degree rather than a difference in kind is what made one body, one sex. Galen correctly identifies homologous sexual and reproductive structures, though incorrectly concludes that women are inverted and less perfect men. Later, the advent of a distinct female anatomy affirms the fundamental biblical social relationship and its power structure, that of man to woman. Two discrete and opposing sexes are invented as a new foundation for gender. One body, one sex becomes two bodies and two distinct biological sexes and social genders through the process of reproductive differentiation. Sex, here meaning intercourse or heterosexual sex, becomes scientifically established as occurring between two anatomically heterogeneous bodies, male and female. In this way, the body becomes a primary site for social discourse. With the body and its reproductive organs as the primary site for sexual discourse, the onus for reproduction is on the women. In his book, Making Sex, Body and Gender, From the Greeks to Freud, Thomas LaCour writes, "Women's bodies in their corporeal, scientifically accessible concreteness, and the very nature of their bones, nerves, and most important reproductive organs came to bear an enormous new weight of meaning. As two sexes are invented to serve as a new foundation for gender, women bear the social, political, and sexual burden." With the body as the site of sexual discourse, we must return to it to liberate and free ourselves and our sexuality through new talk of sexual citizenship and eroticism. Justice and citizenship are complex concepts. Each could be the focus of a singular talk. Here we complicate things further by combining justice and citizenship with eroticism and sex to create erotic justice and sexual citizenship, further complexifying their meaning. Given our limited time, I wanted to find justice and citizenship in terms we can hopefully grasp. I turned to Marvin Ellison in his 1996 book, few are written on the topic, titled Erotic Justice, A Liberating Ethic of Sexuality, to define justice for our purposes with regard to sexuality. Ellison characterizes justice as the ongoing, never-ending journey to remake community by strengthening relationship, which is the invitation here, to be in community together, to imagine and talk about just intimacies. On the other hand, citizenship, broadly defined, is the formal and legal relationship between individual persons known as citizens and the nation state to which they legally belong, that offers protection through rights and requires allegiance through laws. Citizenship distinguishes between public and private spheres, as well as universally applied and distinct classifications. Citizenship is concerned with processes of naturalization or normalization and the production of new others. It also highlights how majorities and minorities construct themselves in relationship to one another. If you are a student in my class this semester, think of strategic essentialism. To better understand citizenship and justice, I want to distinguish between liberation and freedom, whereby liberation is the act of being set free, and freedom is the state of being free. Let's consider sexual citizenship to be liberatory activism, setting oppressed genders and sexualities free, and erotic justice to be the experience of being free sexually, which requires a shift in consciousness in addition to our activism. In her 2021 book on freedom, 4 Songs of Care and Constraint, Maggie Nelson distinguishes between freedom from and freedom to, critical for our efforts regarding sexual citizenship and erotic justice. Freedom from means freedom from sexual oppression, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual violence, etc. Sexual citizenship focuses on freedom from, whereas freedom to means freedom to love who we love, desire what we desire among adults with consent, which is a very complicated topic and complex topic, to experience sensory and sexual pleasure if we so choose. Erotic justice focuses on freedom too. For our purposes, sexual citizenship is a liberation ethic that is concerned, is a liberation ethic or ethos that is concerned with equal access to sexual rights, such as marriage equality and trans rights, and accentuates, again, freedom from. Although sexual citizenship is also theoretical, here I am characterizing sexual citizenship as predominantly focused on obtaining sexual rights. A prominent example is the fight for marriage equality. Sexual citizenship is called intimate citizenship to allow for a wider consideration of intimate and personal life beyond what is typically regarded as sexual. Because flags represent nation states, efforts to attain sexual citizenship and sexual equality are often represented in flags. Here is the United States flag and the pride flag, symbolizing LGBTQ rights. The original rainbow flag was created by Gilbert Baker in 1978 to celebrate members of the gay and lesbian political movement. It originally consisted of 8 colored stripes stacked atop each other to represent a rainbow, a symbol of hope. Baker assigned a specific meaning to each color: pink for sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, turquoise for magic, indigo for serenity, and violet for spirit. Pink and turquoise were dropped due to a shortage of pink fabric and legibility concerns, resulting in the 6-colored rainbow flag most commonly used in the first decades of the 21st century. Historically, sexual citizenship privileges white, cisgender, heterosexual, monogamous, ideally married couples with children. It has expanded to include protection for same-sex loving people, including through the gay rights movement and the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and gender nonconforming folks, trans rights. Sexual citizenship includes the fight for legal protection for alternative abilities and sexual behaviors or lifestyles, including crip justice, sex work, consensual non-monogamy, kink, BDSM, and others. Notably, sexual rights can be legally rescinded, overturning Roe v. Wade and the introduction of legislation to limit access to the abortion pill mifepristone, which is fall within sexual and reproductive rights. This flag, known as the Progress Pride flag, is a reinterpretation of multiple iterations of the Pride flag. Black and brown have been added to show the additional intersectional discrimination Black and brown people face regarding sexual racism. Pink, light blue, and white have been added to represent trans and gender nonconforming people. Yellow is often used to represent those in the intersex community and others who do not fit into the gender binary. The purple circle inside the yellow represents the wholeness of the intersex community, free from colors like blue and pink that are commonly seen as male and female respectively. The reinterpretation of the pride flag shows progress in sexual citizenship and freedom from sexual oppression, although clearly the work is far from done and currently under threat. Still, progress in the arena of sexual citizenship enables us to simultaneously turn toward erotic justice and freedom too. The etymology or origin of the word eros is most often considered to be from late 14th century Greece. It comes from the singular Greek eros and the plural erotis. Eros is the personification of God, is the personification or God of carnal, meaning physical, sexual, or embodied love. Eros is also thought to be pre-Greek with Aramaic origins, derived from liturgical language or divine scripture, meaning to desire. Its divinity is important to our understanding of erotic justice, which we will consider a divine right to love and live freely. In her 1978 paper, Uses of the Erotic is Power, Audre Lorde, a Black lesbian poet and political activist and intersectional feminist, urged Black women to reclaim the erotic. Their erotic is power. In her book, Pleasure Activism, Adrienne Marie Brown presents the reclamation of Eros and Black intersectional feminism, feminists who heeded the siren call, knowing that the reclamation of Eros is essential for activist work. Lorde characterizes the erotic as a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings, adding that the erotic is not a question of what we do. It is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. This acuteness and fullness of feeling should prompt us to learn about the origins of Eros. In Greek mythology, Eros is originally conceived as a primeval god. As Lorde acknowledges, Eros is born of chaos, which represents the original emptiness of the universe. However, there are conflicting origination stories regarding Eros. In Greek mythology, Eros is first born alongside Aphrodite, goddess of love. Later, Eros is born as son of and servant to Aphrodite. This makes Eros both son and god, simultaneously bound and free, which is reflected in our conceptualization of sexual citizenship and erotic justice. Eros is first conceived as a primeval god, born of chaos, representing the original emptiness and generative power of the universe. To conceptualize erotic justice and sexual citizenship, their relation to each other and our relationship to them, it is important to understand that the mythology of Eros reveals conflicting origination stories. As a primeval god, Eros is born again beyond parentage in the wake of the sea foam. The god Cronus cuts off Uranus's genitals and throws them into the sea. Eros is born alongside Aphrodite amid chaos and freedom, which erotic justice symbolizes. For our purposes, it is important to understand that Eros emerges self-formed at the dawn of creation. The ancient Greek religion Orphism named him Phanes, a primal being hatched from the world egg and synonymous with thesis, creation, and physis, nature. Eros is the primordial god of procreation and the driving generative force behind new life in the cosmos. Later, Eros is reconceived as Aphrodite's son, rather than being born alongside of her, becoming the mischievous winged god of love. Eros becomes the progeny, son of Aphrodite and Zeus, king of gods, Aphrodite and Ares, god of war and battle, and son of Aphrodite and Hermes, divine messenger of the god. Eros meddles in the love lives of others at Aphrodite's requests. He becomes a nuisance and servant rather than primordial and powerful god. According to later Greek cosmogony, the Erotis is a collection of winged gods to which Eros belongs that are related to love and sex. The Erotis serve Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. The poet Hesiod introduces a pair of Erotis, Eros meaning love, more so than power, and Himeros meaning desire. Subsequently, Pathos meaning passion is added to form a winged triumvirate. Stripped of his cosmic power, Eros becomes increasingly cherubic and childlike in Roman literature. chaos turns to Cupid in the desexualizing process of domestication, what I refer to elsewhere as colonization. Sex and love become differences of kind rather than degree. Domestication favors love, characterizing sex as risky and dangerous because it is powerful. The domestication of Eros shows a fall from power, which forms the basis of the conscientization required of us to reclaim Eros, to view our sensual and erotic power as necessary and helpful as our capacity to love. Finally, with my last slide, I've done well on time, amazing for me. Long before the Greeks conceived of a voluptuous blonde named Aphrodite, the life-giving powers of a spiritual, highly sexual being can be found in the formidable form of the Lady of Lemba in the area of Cyprus, an extraordinary limestone sculpture. More than 5,000 years old, this glorious being has fat, fructus thighs, curvy breasts, a pregnant belly, and instead of a neck and head, a phallus with eyes. The Lady of Lemba is a wondrous mix of both female and male, representative of homologous structure and difference in degree rather in kind. Let this two-spirit being guide our reclaiming of erotic power, born of chaos and emptiness in the wake of the turbulent sea foam. Indiscriminate, unable to discern between male and female. She is powerful. We are invited to become the same. Thank you. This is the end of Average.
Thank you so much, Carole. We're going to transition to the Q&A. So if any of you have any questions, you can place them in the Q&A tab. And maybe to kind of begin, I can ask a question of Carole, if that's okay. First of all, it felt like 5 talks in one. It was very full and just packed full and very smooth delivery. So just thank you for the talk and for that transmission. A question that I'll begin with, while maybe some of our participants add some to the Q&A. First of all, I love the image of you teaching erotic intelligence in the actual basement or the metaphorical basement, Naropa. It's just a powerful image to think about. And I'm curious about, in the beginning, you spoke about a kind of silence or an inability to speak about sexuality. And you mentioned something that for me really struck home. It was powerful. You mentioned even a fear of losing loved ones in sharing dimensions of things and of desires or of our sexuality, that we feel that there's a kind of a risk or a danger. And I love how that's tied to where you came to the end of this kind of courageous reclamation of Eros from this domestication process that's happened. So anyways, that's just set it up. My question is this. My question is, how do you see your own work with individuals and with couples in kind of helping them through these silences and in this territory with this broader theme, which is really at the heart of your talk, of erotic justice and sexual citizenship? When I hear the word justice and the word citizenship, I think less about individual work and more about broader social processes. I think of a kind of broader cultural situation that's being addressed or needs to be addressed, that there's this clarion call. So how do you see this really profound individual work, be it with, in the work as a professor at Naropa or as a sex and relationship therapist, with this other kind of what's at the heart of this talk. If you could speak to that, I'd be really curious.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Ben. So much actually comes up around that, and maybe I'll start with my last thought, is that one of the topics that we study, particularly in the graduate course I teach in human sexuality, it's located in the counseling psychology program, is a notion of citizen therapy, right? So it's the work, it's really important work to consider that therapy is far too individualistic. I think it's one of its greatest issues and harms. And it tends to, I don't know that I said this, I don't remember if I said this, but my dissertation is actually focused on the way in which therapy is a technology of oppression more than a technology of social change. And that is because therapists, in particular, research has shown us, reaffirm dominant narratives, hegemony, within the therapeutic process. So therapists, counselors have to be really aware that our bodies, our sexualities, our genders are always breathing within, living within culture. We are never separate, right? We are not kind of the old feminist adage, the personal is public, the public, is personal, like it's always there. But it's, for me, it's there in such a profound way. And I think I want to get back to just what you said about silence, and I want to hear other questions, but that the idea that we are separate silences us, right? I think it does that to us. So that it's so important to understand in our interdependency, right? In our interbeingness, which Thich Nhat Hanh talked about. I brought that up in my book. We are sexually interdependent, right? And I'm not here referring to group sex, though people may want to do that, but it is kind of like we're really dependent and interdependent on one another and not alone, right? And so speaking kind of begins to kind of disrupt, right? The silencing that occurs, right? That we internalize and think that's how it should be. So does that answer a bit?
It does. It does. And it also kind of problematized my question in a great way. So thank you.
Yeah.
We have a number of questions that are starting to beam in.
Yeah. Right.
This one's from Joelle. Were there any consequences to the Naropa Mantis sex picnic discussion, given that sex positivity is still under-discussed and under-claimed within its campus?
Can you read that again? Hello, Joelle. Thank you for the question.
So yeah, what were the consequences of this picnic discussion, given that sex positivity is still under-discussed and under-claimed at Naropa?
I think how I want to answer that is you're identifying some slides that I pulled out because my talk was far longer than even this, Joelle. And one of the things that's so essential to understand is to distinguish that there is sex negativity, which we could quickly say is the kind of the framing of sex as dangerous or bad. And then there is sex positivity, which is opening the dialogue around sexuality and understanding that sexuality and sex are good and avenues for growth and helpful. And what I would add to that, of course, is sex critical, which my students, if you're here tonight, know we talk a lot about that. The need to get away again from the binary of negative and positive sexuality, sex negative, sex positive, and move into what is sex critical, so that we're constantly viewing sexuality through a critical eye, but I also want to say kind of a conscious and expanded mind, right? So both kind of penetrative, right, and open, right? And if we just think of those words in terms of sexuality, they show up a lot, right? And so we can use them to actually help us consider how to be critical and how to be interrogative, just in our discourse of sexuality. Yeah.
Thanks, Carole.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready for another?
I'm ready.
Can you say more about the issue of privacy?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't privacy related to intimacy? Or I'm not sure. There's a kind of question there. There's not fully understanding, but you mentioned privacy in the talk. So
Mm-hmm.
if you could maybe elaborate that in relationship to intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think what I want to say about privacy, it's an important topic in discussions of sexuality and in considering this idea of, let's say, erotic justice and sexual citizenship. I want to, though, I think, distinguish between private and personal, right? So kind of the, and maybe public. I want to acknowledge that privacy often can mean boundaries, right? Holding close to oneself, one's experience of sexuality, so one doesn't feel forced into kind of divulging or sharing or doing what they may not want to do. I would say all of that. So privacy is really important. But I want to distinguish it or just note that if we conflate privacy and kind of sexuality, if we make it both private and personal, then we fail to lose the clear seeing that we are always being affected by something larger, that our sexuality, our intimate lives are being profoundly affected by the public socio-political sphere. So that's, I think, how I would answer that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump around. We have some really great questions. A lot are coming in. This one's just a very practical one and maybe more general, but hello from NYC. What
Lovely.
of freeing our erotic selves look like? And are there any specific resources you might recommend?
Yeah, yeah. So I love that question. Maybe I'll try to answer it a bit. I actually see it as an upcoming talk. So I think that what I've done here is really just lay like the foundation. Like there was so much to get through by way of topic. And now we've arrived at, okay, maybe we're distinguishing or we understand the difference between and the necessity for both sexual citizenship and erotic justice. And now it's like, how do we, right? So maybe one thing I'll say is simply to notice the way eroticism lands in our bodies, right? It's such a felt experience, right? Because it's such a sensory experience. And I think just pausing, when I think of the three prajnas, you know, the practice of engaging in tasting and chewing and digesting slows us down so we notice what's going on. Even if it's a concept, we notice like, how are our bodies relating to said concept? So I think I would encourage, I love the question. I want to say stay tuned for a fuller exploration, because I do hope this is the beginning of a series. But the idea of paying attention to the body, and I think I want to say one more thing, not just in the physical sense, but what we might call the subtle or energetic body. It's so important because it's also what's, I think our physical and subtle body are combining to help us experience our senses. And so that's what I want to invite for that questioner to do.
Great. Okay, this is a longer one. I've been thinking a lot about why, as a society, our relationship with sex is so confusing and repressed, specifically its relationship to religion. Religion is so often what we point to when we talk about repression and heteronormative ideas about gender, sex, etc. And I suppose I've been thinking about if that is really the culprit. As these ideas are so programmed and embedded psychologically that so much of what we understand about religion is seen through those lenses, do you think religion causes sexual repression, or is this something that goes deeper and farther?
Great question. I love its thoroughness. Um, you know, it's really interesting. I think what I'll do, I think I never like to say anything definitively. So I might say, I don't know, right? And then I'll play with the question a bit and say that notice what happened with the advent of anatomy and the move to establish disciplinary science, right? Scientific evidence. Sexology, which is the scientific study of sex, really took as its guide the natural sciences. Right? So to categorize and look what happened where we moved from Galen, right, who characterized the body, right, the father of anatomy, who in his work of anatomy characterized the body as one sex, right? And later, what happened, and I said this in the talk, is it converted to two sexes to align with our religious understanding, with the biblical understanding. But I always wonder, like, what comes first? Is it religion? Is it political? I don't know that we can ever tease those apart, right? So I feel curious about the question to kind of keep it percolating.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we're doing well. We have time for more. How does one reclaim their sexual sovereignty on an individual level, specifically when there is trauma there?
Yeah. So I think it's really useful when there is trauma to get support. And I would say therapeutic support can be quite helpful. And I want to offer caution because within students have heard me say this many, many times, those who are training to be counselors, that we are more comfortable talking about trauma as therapists than we are talking about sex. And I want to note that, right? So we are more comfortable talking about sexual trauma than we are talking about sexual pleasure. And that's a problem, and it will limit our experience, right? In healing trauma, I would want to see somebody who has had sexual trauma, which is a huge amount of people, sadly, tragically. I am one. So how important it is to be able to do work around healing and thriving as a result of sexual trauma that also can hold simultaneously the leaning into what does desire feel like? What does pleasure feel like? So without knowing the particulars of this person's experience, I would have a lot of questions, right? And I would want to know their personal relationship, their current relationship to desire, right? Not just sexual desire, but certainly to desire, right? So that would be something it would be one starting point. And then working with feeling desire. A lot of bodies, for example, who have experienced, people and bodies who have experienced sexual trauma will be very ticklish, right? So there's a way to work with tickle, right? If there's a partnership, or to just notice how the body reacts, right? The body can seize, right? So the body can do different things as a result of sexual trauma, and that we want to be able to work and kind of relax the body over time so it can begin to experience pleasure, right? What that person deems feels pleasurable, which at first might not.
This next question is kind of related, so maybe I'll go with it next. Could we still assign a liberatory function to therapy if we understood it as unlearning of normativity? That's the first part.
Mm-hmm.
But if so, how do we deal with the desire to be normal that so many folks have?
Yeah, so good. Would you read it again, Ben? I just want to twirl it around.
Yeah. So first part, could we still assign a liberatory function to therapy if we understood it as unlearning of normativity? But if so, how do we deal with the desire to be normal that so many folks have?
Yeah, so great. So could we still assign the liberatory function to therapy? I think we should. So it's a great question. I think we should. I think it's essential. And how do I want to say? Holding it open, I think is what I want to say. Kind of holding, without it becoming a project, right? So holding it open, holding the notion of liberatory function, which also I think is very developmental, right? So I'll just say that. And then working with so many of the clients that I have worked with in this arena are really in pain because they feel they are not normal, right? So there's a lot of suffering in the comparison to what is normal. And there are different ways to work with that therapeutically. I think it's important. I've made the mistake of not just honoring that experience early in my career, right? Like wanting to convince somebody that it was okay to not be normal, right? Which is not good. So don't do that. I wouldn't suggest that. I think what's really important is to foreground difference, which is just what is, right? Because there isn't normal. One of my favorite articles is looking at the normativity of heteronormativity. It's like, it's not like, it's like not normal, right? It's like it all falls apart, right? It all falls apart. So really foregrounding difference and not in difference of kind, right? I think that's where we get into trouble. It's like you and me, us and them, because we get into kind of the binary, we get into all the comparison, but in degrees, right? It's like it has such a different quality when we can foreground difference, and the extent to which you're comfortable. I'm always curious about how you might use story of your own lived experience in a therapeutic setting or not to make difference. I'm going to say something tacky. I almost want to say make difference sexy, but I mean it because it is actually, right? It's like we are turned on by otherness, right? Like truly, we like it's wonder and awe, right? To encounter other. And we think we know someone, especially someone who we might be having sex with if we're doing it repeatedly over time, but we don't know them because we're not static. We're changing all the time, so that our invitation is to realize that, kind of to understand ourselves as process, right? Yeah, ongoingly. Yeah.
Here's also a related question. As someone who wants to be a spiritually integrated therapist, I'm curious on how you would meet and hold people who have more conservative views on these issues.
Yeah, yeah. I work with a range of humans in my practice who we could say, let's say, are on the spectrum to being religiously, sexually conservative to religion, to non-religious, sexually progressive. I mean, quite a range. And I think it's really important to be curious about who you're working with and affirm who they are, however they are. I think within, I think that regardless, I want to say that kind of regardless of the maybe the conservatism, let's say, that may show up in religious dogma. I don't know that that's any harder to work with than somebody who may consider themselves sexually progressive and yet not think they're progressive enough, right? Or queer enough, right? So I think it's understanding that there's a fundamental suffering that shows up in this arena, which again has to do with the worry about being normal, right? And so we just want to keep problematizing normal and get curious about what else can we substitute, like just expand the definition of normal, you know, like vanilla ice cream. I try to do it with that, you know, vanilla even.
I love the vanilla part of the talk. The mastication and the preparation and the biosphere. This next question, I think we have time for one or two more. This next question is kind of related to an area of my research on classical Tantra and Neo-Tantra. How do you feel about modern day, often problematic tantric teachers, educators that are focusing so much attention on sex, but sometimes in a harmful way? There's a caveat. I say this without absolutes, as I know it's not always the case, but modern day tantric or sacred sexuality can oftentimes be what people go to when they're trying to liberate themselves sexually. And then sometimes they end up becoming harmed. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on this, Ben?
Well, it's a huge topic for me. I teach a course on Hindu Tantra here at Naropa, and one of the goals is to just help students have discernment between classical tantric traditions and Neo-Tantra as a movement with its own history. In terms of the ethics of Neo-Tantra, when there's a conflation and a kind of a stand-in for modern sacred sexuality as somehow in continuity and drawing on the authority of Buddhist or Hindu tantric or Shakta tantric traditions, that there's some issues there. But if you look at the history of the occult and this interest in sexuality and the tying it to Tantra in the West especially, but now globally, it's also just a really interesting tradition. When it comes to actual communities of Neo-Tantrikas, just from some of my research and students' research, it gets pretty messy pretty quickly. And I'm also really curious to hear your thoughts as somebody who's done such a deep dive in critical sexual studies. I think a lot of these practitioners and teachers do not have that kind of background care and consideration of the nuances and complexities that you're bringing out. So
yeah. I appreciated just what you had to share there. It was very helpful. I think a word that struck out to me early on is the necessity of discernment. And I'm reminded in this question of when I first began teaching in this arena. Erotic intelligence was the name of a special topics course back in 2013. I had no idea what it was going to be. It was unfolding, and then it ran for, I think, 6 years or something. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. And I learned along with my students. But what was fascinating to me was the emails and the phone calls and the reach outs I got from people who, it was astonishing to me, who I would say were in the field of sexuality in some way. Few to none with a critical lens. And that blew my mind, actually. It blew my mind. And so it made me, and yet I am grateful, because it made me realize how essential it was to hold that view. And it actually led me, that and other things led me to begin my doctoral work in critical sexuality studies, which it's the only program in the country. There are only two, but the focus at CIS is really critical sexuality studies. So I've engaged in some neo-tantra practice and workshops myself. I could, if I knew who you were, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And it really requires discernment. That is what I will say. They were not always good experiences, and a couple of them were, right? So it requires a lot of discernment. And one of the things for me that's really important is understanding neo-tantric teachers' knowledge of queerness. I want to know that's I will interview them right away. Tell me about that. Because if they can't hold that and the complexity of that within the teaching they're doing, I will not have anything to do with it. Because it's telling me there's something really important missing there.
I think that actually brings us to time.
Great.
I want to just take a moment and thank you so much, Carole, for this teaching, for your knowledge, for the Q&A part, just for your responses. It was incredibly rich evening and exploration. And thank you to everyone as well who's participated. Carole, do you have any final thoughts? Or
Yeah, I want to say thank you to you, Ben. As you know, I said to you, and I'll let everyone know, that I needed to feel held in this process, right? Because it's always a jittery experience for me, and any kind of public speaking, and your presence and getting to know you as a colleague has just been fabulous and will continue to be, I'm sure. So thank you so much. And thank you all I'm seeing hearts have been going across the screen, and, other floating emojis. At first it was startling. I thought it was behind me. Hearts were dripping. And I realized it was on the screen. So I just want to thank everyone who's come tonight and to listen to what I hope will be the first among many other talks. So yeah, thank you.